Eli was halfway through answering an email when he felt the lightest tug on his sleeve. It was so small he almost thought he imagined it. But when he glanced to his side, Issa was there, standing barefoot in the doorway, her dark hair a little messy from her afternoon nap, eyes fixed on him like she was deciding if she could trust him with something important. For a moment she didn't say a word. She just stood there, her small fingers curling around the fabric of his shirt. Eli was used to quiet from her. She'd been that way since the adoption 6 months ago. Polite, cautious, never quite letting her guard down. But then she leaned in, close enough that he could feel her breath warm against his ear, and whispered, "There's a camera in your office and it's not yours." The words didn't make sense at first. He pulled back to look at her, expecting maybe she was playing a game or repeating something she'd overheard. But there was no playfulness in her face, just that steady, serious gaze that seemed far too old for 8 years. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice softer now. Issa's eyes shifted toward the far corner of the room, to the gold-framed painting his girlfriend Sabrina had given him last month. "I've seen it blink at night, when you're not here." Eli almost laughed, out of habit. Of course there wasn't a camera in his office, he was the one who designed the security system. But something in her tone made him pause. There was no drama in it, no wild story, just a quiet, matter-of-fact truth, as if she'd been holding it in for days, and finally decided to risk telling him. And that pause, that split second of hesitation, was enough for something cold to settle in his chest. Eli's first instinct was to tell her she must be mistaken, but Issa didn't give him the chance. She shifted her weight from one bare foot to the other, like she'd rehearsed this in her head, and said, "It started after she brought that painting, the one with the hills and flowers." He glanced at the frame again. Sabrina had insisted it would brighten the room, said every successful man needed a little beauty where he worked. He'd smiled, let her hang it herself. He'd barely looked at it since. "I'm not saying she's bad," Issa added quickly, as if she didn't want to get anyone in trouble. I notice things." That was an understatement. In the 6 months she'd lived here, she had proven herself a quiet shadow, slipping through the house with eyes that missed nothing. Foster care had taught her to watch before speaking. It was how she knew which adults could be trusted and which ones only looked safe from a distance. "How did you even—" he began, but Issa was already pulling her small tablet from the oversized pocket of her hoodie. "I used this," she said, tapping the screen. "It's just an app I found. It shows what's connected to the Wi-Fi." On the display, Eli recognized the devices in his home, his laptop, his phone, the smart lights. But there were others labelled only as unknown. One was active right now. Eli felt the first flicker of unease, but tried to keep his voice steady. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" She looked down, tracing the edge of the tablet with her thumb. "I tried, but you're busy, and sometimes grown-ups think kids are making stuff up." Her words landed heavier than he expected. It wasn't defiance, just a fact she'd learned too young. Eli glanced again at the painting. For the first time, it didn't look like a gift. It looked like something else entirely. That night, after Issa had gone to bed, Eli found himself standing in the middle of his office, staring at the painting. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator down the hall. He'd looked at this gift 100 times without really seeing it, but now every detail felt different. He reached out, letting his fingertips brush the heavy gold frame. In the dim light, he thought he saw it, the tiniest flicker, like the blink of an eye. He stepped back, heart beating harder than it should. He remembered the day Sabrina brought it over. She had come in carrying the wrapped canvas like it was something precious, peeling away the paper to reveal a soft landscape of rolling hills and wildflowers. "Your office needs something warm," she'd said with that smile that made it hard to say no. She'd insisted on hanging it herself, claiming she wanted it at just the right height for the light. At the time, he'd taken it as thoughtfulness. Now he wondered if it had been precision. He sat down at his desk and stared at the frame from across the room. A reasonable part of him kept saying there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a reflection, maybe some harmless quirk of the frame's design. But another part, quieter and sharper, reminded him of Issa's tone when she told him. She hadn't been guessing. She had been certain. The next morning, he made coffee and found her already at the kitchen table, legs swinging under the chair, her tablet in front of her. "It blinked again," she said without looking up. "Twice after you turned off the lights." He felt a knot tighten in his chest. "You're sure?" Issa finally met his eyes. "I don't say things unless I'm sure." And in that moment, he realised he believed her more than he believed the excuses he'd been telling himself. By the second week of watching the painting, Eli was no longer pretending this was all in his head. The blinking wasn't random. It happened at night, always when the room was still. He told himself he'd get it checked, but work kept pulling him in. Deadlines, calls, meetings. And maybe, if he was honest, part of him didn't want to know. It was Josephine who broke the quiet. She'd been part of the house for as long as Eli could remember. The kind of person who moved through rooms without disturbing the air, noticing everything without making it obvious. One afternoon, as she set a mug of tea on his desk, she nodded toward the painting. "That's new." Eli looked up, caught off guard. "Sabrina gave it to me last month." Josephine's expression didn't change, but she lingered. Funny thing. I saw her in here last week while you were out. She said she was tidying, but she was standing at your desk, not the shelves. Had her phone out, looked focused. He tried to play it off. Probably checking a message? Maybe, Josephine said, but her voice carried the kind of weight that meant she didn't believe it. Then she glanced toward the doorway, lowering her voice just a touch. "Issa's been asking me questions about that painting. She's sharper than people think." Eli felt a flicker of guilt. Issa had been trying to tell him something for days, maybe weeks, and it had taken Josephine's quiet confirmation for him to truly feel the shift inside. That moment when doubt tips over into suspicion. Later that night, he found Issa in the living room, curled up in the corner of the couch with a blanket. The TV was on, but she wasn't watching. "Josephine told me what she saw," he said. Issa just nodded, her eyes still on the screen. "So now you believe me?" Eli sat down beside her. "I'm starting to." Her shoulders eased, just a little. And in that small movement, he realised how much it mattered to her, not just being right, but being heard. Eli wasn't the kind of man who jumped to conclusions. In business, he'd learned to confirm before confronting, to gather facts before making moves. That night, after Isa had gone to bed, he sat at his desk and opened a blank document. The words he typed weren't real, just convincing enough to look like the first draft of something important. He labelled it with a file name that hinted at a final proposal, then left it sitting right in the centre of his desk. Before locking up, he installed a small security camera of his own, tucked high in the corner where no one would think to look. He didn't tell anyone except Josephine and Isa. "This is just a test," he told them in the kitchen the next morning. "If nothing happens, we drop it. If something does..." He didn't have to finish. Isa leaned over the counter, her eyes narrowed the way they did when she was thinking 2 steps ahead. "What if she doesn't come in for a while?" "She will," Josephine said, setting down her coffee. "Some people can't resist the habit once they've started." For 2 days, the file sat untouched. Eli started to wonder if he'd been wrong, or maybe if Sabrina had sensed something. Then, on the 3rd evening, while he was out meeting a client, the motion alert pinged his phone. He pulled over in the parking lot and opened the live feed. There she was. Sabrina walked into his office like she belonged there, not even glancing at the camera's hiding spot. She sat at his desk, woke up the laptop, and began scrolling through files. When she opened the final proposal, she pulled her phone from her bag and began taking photos of the screen, 1 page at a time. Eli watched, a cold heaviness settling in his stomach. There was no hesitation in her movements, no sense of guilt. She knew exactly what she was doing. Later that night, he closed the office door and showed Isa the footage. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just watched, her face unreadable, then looked up at him and asked quietly, "So, what do we do now?" For the first time since this started, Eli didn't have an easy answer. Eli waited until dinner the next evening. The 3 of them, he, Sabrina, and Isa, sat around the long oak table, plates of pasta between them. Isa picked at her food in silence, eyes on her plate. Sabrina was talking about a new yoga studio she wanted to try. When there was a pause, Eli set his fork down, We need to talk about something. Sabrina tilted her head, her smile still in place. That sounds serious. He kept his tone even. I know you were in my office the other night. I know you opened my laptop and went through my files. The smile faltered. For half a second, something unreadable crossed her face before she leaned back, laughing lightly. You're kidding, right? Eli, why would I have it on video. The air seemed to thicken between them. Sabrina's expression shifted from surprise to hurt. Her voice trembled just enough to sound convincing. You recorded me? You think I'd steal from you? After everything? Across the table, Issa's fork froze midair. Eli tried to hold on to the facts, to the clear image of her scrolling through his files. But Sabrina's eyes glistened with tears, and part of him, the part that had wanted this relationship to be real, hesitated. I thought we trusted each other, she said softly, dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. If you had questions, you could have asked me, not spied on me. From the corner of his vision, he saw Isa lean back in her chair. She didn't roll her eyes, didn't say a word, but her face told him everything. This wasn't shock to her, this was recognition. When dinner ended, Sabrina went upstairs early, claiming a headache. The moment her footsteps faded, Isa turned to him. You don't believe her, do you? He hesitated. I believe what I saw. Isa studied him for the moment. Then don't forget it just because she's crying. It stung, not because she was wrong, but because she was right. The next morning, Eli sat alone in his office with a mug of coffee gone cold. He hadn't slept much. The image of Sabrina at his desk kept replaying in his mind, but so did the sound of her voice, soft, wounded, asking how he could think that of her. He opened his work laptop, determined to stop circling the same thoughts. If she had taken that file, there would be a trail. There was always a trail. It didn't take long to find it. The decoy document had been accessed remotely less than an hour after she left his office that night. The IP address wasn't hers. It belonged to a secure account tied to someone he knew well. Too well. Miles, his oldest friend. The man who'd sat next to him in college classes, who'd been there when he started this company in his apartment, who now served as his right-hand man. Miles had every reason to protect him, yet the file had passed through his account before being forwarded to an unfamiliar email domain. Eli leaned back in his chair, his stomach tight. It didn't make sense, unless they were working together. He heard light footsteps in the hallway. Isa appeared in the doorway, hair still damp from her morning shower, clutching a bowl of cereal. You look like you found something, she said. I might have, he replied, his voice lower than he intended. She came closer, peering at the screen. Who's Miles? A friend, Eli said, the word tasting wrong in his mouth. At least I thought he was. Isa didn't speak right away. She just studied his face, the way kids do when they're deciding whether you're ready to hear what they think. Finally, she set her cereal down. If you really want to know the truth, she said, you can't just wait for it to come to you. You have to set it up so they can't help but show you who they are. Now that Miles's connection was clear, Eli knew the trap had to catch them both. And he also knew he couldn't do it alone. They met in the kitchen after dinner, the house settling into its usual quiet. Josephine was rinsing dishes, Isa sat cross-legged on a stool, and Eli stood leaning against the counter with his arms folded. I think I know how to make them slip, he said. Josephine dried her hands and gave him a look that meant she was listening. Go on. I'm going to create a new file, he explained. Something they can't resist, final numbers, sensitive details. Except it won't be real. It'll be laced with a tracker so I'll know exactly where it goes and who opens it. Isa's eyes lit with interest. And you'll leave it somewhere they can't miss? Exactly. I'll act like I'm heading out of town for the night. That'll give them the window they think they need. Josephine frowned. That's risky if they realise you're onto them. Eli shook his head. They won't. I'll make it look like business as usual. Dinner with a client, back late. They'll think I'm distracted. Isa tapped her fingers on the counter, thinking. You should put it in the same place as before so it feels normal to them. People like that, when they've gotten away with something once, they go back to the same spot. There was a quiet confidence in her voice that made Eli stop and really look at her. She wasn't guessing. She knew. All right, he said. Tomorrow night. Josephine slid a mug of tea toward him. Then tonight you get some rest. You're going to need your head clear. But when Eli finally lay in bed, the rest didn't come. His mind kept circling the same questions. If the trap worked, he'd have proof. But proof meant the truth. and the truth might mean losing two people he'd let into his life, one he'd called a friend for years, and one he'd thought could be something more. Down the hall, Issa's nightlight glowed under her door. He wondered if she was awake, thinking the same thing. Eli made sure the evening looked ordinary from start to finish. He ate an early dinner with Issa and Josephine, talked about weekend plans, even joked about the neighbour's dog that had been digging up the flower beds. At 7:30, he slipped on his jacket and grabbed his keys. "Don't wait up," he told them with a casual wave, like he was just headed to a late business meeting. Sabrina was in the living room, legs curled under her on the couch, flipping through a magazine. "Drive safe," she called, giving him that easy smile. He smiled back, then walked out the front door, started his car, and drove just far enough for the sound to fade. A few streets away he parked, killed the engine, and circled back on foot. The back entrance Josephine had left unlocked for him was waiting in the dark. From the upstairs guest room that overlooked his office, they had the perfect vantage point. The small security camera's live feed glowed on Issa's tablet propped between them. Josephine stood at the window, listening for movement. At first nothing, just the hum of the house, the faint rattle of tree branches against the siding. Then, 15 minutes after Eli had left, they saw her. Sabrina walked into his office like she'd done it 100 times before, moving with that same unhurried confidence he'd once found charming. She went straight to his desk, opened the laptop and found the planted file. Her phone was out in seconds, camera clicking as she photographed each page on the screen. "Tracker's active," Issa whispered, her eyes locked on the tablet. "It's already bouncing to an outside server." Eli felt his jaw tighten. There was no hesitation in Sabrina's movements, no sign of guilt, just precision. She didn't stop until the last page was captured. Then she closed the laptop, smoothed her hair, and left the room as if she'd only been straightening a picture frame. The data trail on Issa's screen told the rest of the story. Within minutes, the file was opened from a secure account registered to Miles. Eli leaned closer to watch the feed, a knot tightening in his chest. The pieces were no longer just suspicious, they were falling into place. By the time the room fell quiet again, he knew there was no more grey area. He had them, all the proof he needed, and in the morning, there would be no avoiding what had to happen next. The next morning, Eli didn't have to pretend anymore. He had everything, the video, the data trail, the connection to Miles. There was no more space for doubt, and no room for excuses. Sabrina came down for breakfast, hair pulled back, coffee in hand, like nothing in the world was wrong. But when she saw Josephine and Issa sitting at the table with him, her steps slowed. Eli pushed his phone across the table. The screen was paused on the image of her in his office the night before. For a long second, no one spoke. Then Sabrina set her coffee down, her smile fading. "I guess you finally decided to believe her," she said, nodding toward Issa. "I did," Eli said quietly, "and I should have done it sooner." She looked at Issa, and for a flicker of a moment, something sharp flashed in her eyes before she turned away. "Well," she said with a shrug, "I suppose I'll get my things." There was no shouting, no dramatic scene, just the sound of her heels on the hardwood as she walked out of the house and out of their lives. When the door closed, Eli let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Issa's eyes were on him, steady and searching. "So, what happens now?" "Now," he said, "we make sure the right people see this. Miles won't get away with it." Later that week, with the help of his legal team, the evidence was turned over to the board. Miles was removed from his position and placed under investigation. The damage he and Sabrina had planned never had the chance to happen. That Friday night, the three of them sat in the living room, take-out boxes on the coffee table, a movie playing in the background. Issa had curled into the corner of the couch, her head resting lightly against Eli's arm. "You really listened this time," she said softly, not taking her eyes off the screen. "I did," Eli replied, "and I'm never going to forget what you told me." Josephine glanced over from her chair, a small, knowing smile on her face. "That's what families do," she said. Eli thought about that, about how family wasn't just the people you were born to, but the ones who stood with you when everything was on the line. And as Issa's breathing slowed beside him, he realised that for the first time in a long time, the house finally felt like home. Lesson learned. Sometimes the most important truths come from the voices we least expect. Trust what you see, stay grounded when emotions get in the way, and protect the people who trust you. Thank you for watching until the very end of this story. I'm truly grateful for it. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you again on Rain Inside.